Some men buy Teslas when the marriage gets rocky. I check credit card bills. Less fun, more revealing. My name is Grant Halston, and at 48, I've learned that the devil isn't in the details. He's in the visa statements your wife thinks you don't read. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. It started 3 months ago when Elise began having what she called inspiration dinners. My wife, a graphic designer with more ambition than talent, suddenly needed evening meetings to spark her creativity. Funny thing about creativity, it apparently required a lot of expensive wine and boutique hotel lounges. "Don't wait up, honey," she'd chirp, grabbing her designer purse, the one I'd bought her for our anniversary. Meeting with an old college friend about a potential collaboration. Old college friend. Right. In my line of work as a corporate tax consultant, I've seen enough creative accounting to recognize creative storytelling when I hear it. The first red flag was her phone. Elise used to leave it everywhere. Kitchen counter, coffee table, bathroom sink. Suddenly it was surgically attached to her hip. She'd giggle at texts during dinner, then flip the screen down with a guilty smile. "Just Sarah being ridiculous," she'd say. But Sarah was sitting across from us at that very dinner party. The second red flag was Miriam, my assistant at the consulting firm. 32, sharp as a tack, and blessed with the kind of observational skills that made her invaluable in my business. She started making little comments. "Funny how Elise needs so much evening inspiration lately," Miriam said one Tuesday, filing client reports with surgical precision. "Must be nice to have such a flexible creative schedule." "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, though I already knew. "Nothing," she said, but her smirk said everything. "Just that some of us work normal hours. Speaking of which, you might want to check the shared location app on your phone. You know, the one you set up for safety?" I'd forgotten about that app. We'd installed it 2 years ago after Elise got lost driving to a client meeting. For emergencies, she'd said. Turned out, it was about to create one. That Thursday evening, while Elise was at another inspiration dinner, I opened the app. Her little blue dot was pulsing from the Meridian Lounge downtown. Expensive place, the kind where a glass of wine costs more than most people's lunch. But here's the interesting part. Miriam's dot was there too. I called my best friend Terry, a divorce lawyer with a sense of humor darker than black coffee. "Hypothetically," I said, "if someone wanted to catch their spouse in a lie, what would be the most dramatic way to do it?" "Hypothetically," Terry replied, "I'd suggest bringing witnesses and a camera. Also, hypothetically, you should probably call me tomorrow about retainer fees." The next evening, I did something that would make my old Methodist grandmother roll in her grave. I lied. Told Elise I was working late on the Morrison account. Instead, I sat in my Honda Civic across from the Meridian Lounge like some discount private investigator, watching the valet parking area. At 7:30, a silver Maserati pulled up. Out stepped Cory Lane, tall, artificially tanned, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. I recognized him from Elise's old college photos, back when she still showed me things instead of hiding them. At 7:45, Elise arrived in her BMW, wearing the black dress I'd complimented that morning. She practically skipped to the entrance, where Cory was waiting with a smile that made my stomach turn. At 8:15, Miriam showed up. My assistant, my loyal, trustworthy assistant who'd been making snide comments about my wife's schedule. I sat there for 3 hours, watching through the floor-to-ceiling windows as my wife laughed at another man's jokes, as my assistant played some kind of third wheel, as my 15-year marriage dissolved in real time over overpriced cocktails. But here's the thing about being a tax consultant. You learn patience. You learn to gather evidence. You learn that the best revenge isn't served hot. It's served with documentation. I drove home, poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon, and started making phone calls. The first was to Terry. It's not hypothetical anymore, I said. The second call was more interesting. I'd done some research on Cory Lane. Turns out he was married to Alicia Lane, a woman who made her fortune in commercial real estate and had a reputation for crushing business rivals like empty beer cans. "Mrs. Lane?" I said when she answered. "My name is Grant Halston. I think your husband and my wife are having dinner. Care to join me for dessert?" The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought she'd hung up. Then, in a voice that could freeze hell, "Where and when?" Friday night, Elise announced another inspiration dinner. "Same friend," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Might be late." "No problem," I replied. "I've got plans too." Alicia Lane turned out to be exactly what I'd expected: immaculate, intimidating, and furious. We met at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the Meridian Lounge. She was already there when I arrived, sitting ramrod straight in a tailored suit that screamed money and power. "Show me," she said without preamble. I slid my phone across the table, screenshots of location data going back 6 weeks, Elise and Cory's dots, dancing together across Boston's most expensive restaurants and lounges, dates, times, duration of visits. Alicia studied the evidence with the cold efficiency of someone who'd built an empire by never showing weakness. "How long have you known?" "Suspected for months, confirmed last week. You?" "I hired a private investigator 2 months ago," she said. "Cory's been sloppy. Hotel receipts, unexplained charges, coming home smelling like perfume I don't wear." She looked up from the phone. "But this is better than anything my investigator found. Real-time proof." "What do you want to do about it?" Alicia's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "I want to watch them squirm." We walked into the Meridian Lounge like we owned the place. Alicia probably could have bought it without checking her account balance. The hostess tried to intercept us, but Alicia had the kind of presence that parted crowds. They were at a corner table, intimate and cozy. Cory's hand was covering Elise's, and they were leaning close, whispering like teenagers. Miriam sat across from them, playing lookout, until she saw us approaching. Her face went white. "Well, well," Alicia said, loud enough to turn heads at neighboring tables. "What a cozy little gathering." Elise jerked her hand away from Cory's like she'd been burned. Cory went pale under his artificial tan. Miriam looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. "Grant," Elise stammered. "What are you doing here?" "Funny story," I said, pulling out a chair and sitting down uninvited. Alicia did the same. "My wife keeps having these mysterious dinner meetings, so I thought I'd finally meet her dining companions. Alicia, meet my wife Elise and my assistant Miriam. Ladies, meet Cory's wife Alicia." The silence was deafening. Other diners were starting to stare, sensing drama. "This isn't what it looks like," Elise said, her voice cracking. "Really?" I pulled out my phone and opened the location app. "Because according to this, you and Cory have been having dinner together twice a week for 6 weeks, always at places that cost more than most people's car payments. And somehow, Miriam keeps ending up at the same restaurants on the same nights. What are the odds?" Cory finally found his voice. "Look, Grant, we're just old friends catching up." "Shut up," Alicia said with Arctic calm. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "Cory, these are divorce papers. I'm filing on Monday. You can keep the Maserati, but everything else is mine, including the house, the boat, and the condo in Aspen." She slid the envelope across the table. Cory stared at it like it was a bomb. "And Elise," I continued, pulling out my own folder. "These are copies of emails between you and Mr. DeWitt, your biggest client. The ones where you billed him for evening strategy sessions that were actually your date nights, along with expense reports showing you charged him for these dinners. That's called fraud." Elise's face crumpled. "Grant, please." "Oh, but wait, there's more," Miriam said suddenly. All eyes turned to my assistant, who'd apparently decided to pick a side. "Elise, honey, you should know. Cory's been texting me too. All those times you thought you were his only side piece? Surprise! He was playing both of us." The table erupted. Elise turned on Miriam, hissing accusations. Cory tried to deny everything, while simultaneously opening the divorce papers with shaking hands. Alicia sat back, watching the chaos with satisfaction. But the real fireworks started when I spotted a familiar figure at the bar. Mr. DeWitt, Elise's biggest client, was having a drink and had clearly overheard everything. "Excuse me," I said, standing up. I walked over to DeWitt, a 70-year-old man who'd built his construction empire on handshake deals and old-school integrity. "Mr. DeWitt," I said, "I believe you should see these." I handed him the folder containing Elise's fraudulent expense reports. His face darkened as he read. "She charged me for these dinners?" he asked. "Everyone called them client development expenses." DeWitt stood up, all 6 feet and 200 pounds of him, and walked over to our table. Elise looked up hopefully until she saw his expression. "You're fired," he said simply. "And I'll be contacting my lawyer about recovering the money you stole from me." He walked out, leaving Elise in tears and Cory frantically trying to calculate his post-divorce net worth. "Well," Alicia said, standing and smoothing her skirt, "this has been educational. Cory, don't come home tonight, or any night. The locks are being changed." She left with the dignity of a queen, leaving the 3 conspirators to face the wreckage of their schemes. I stood to leave, but Elise grabbed my arm. "Grant, we can work this out. It was just a mistake." "No," I said, gently removing her hand. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. This was a choice. A series of choices. And now you get to live with the consequences." I walked out into the cool Boston evening, leaving my wife, my assistant, and Cory Lane to figure out how to split a check they could no longer afford. The next morning, I did 3 things. First, I called the bank and froze all joint accounts. Second, I called my office and fired Miriam. Third, I called Terry and told him to file divorce papers. "On what grounds?" Terry asked. "Adultery, fraud, and terminal stupidity," I said. "I can work with the first 2, he replied. Elise came home that afternoon to find the locks changed and her belongings in boxes on the front porch. She pounded on the door, screaming about her rights and demanding to be let in. I watched from the upstairs window as neighbors came out to witness the spectacle. When she finally stopped screaming, I opened the window. "Your lawyer can contact my lawyer," I called down. "Everything else you need to know is in the envelope taped to your suitcase." The envelope contained copies of all the evidence I'd gathered, a notice that I was filing for divorce, and a letter from DeWitt's attorney demanding restitution for her fraudulent billing. She read it standing on my front lawn, and I watched her face crumble as the full scope of her situation became clear. No job, no money, no home, and a potential lawsuit for fraud. Cory wasn't faring much better. Alicia had moved fast, freezing his accounts and filing restraining orders. He'd been reduced to sleeping in his office and eating vending machine dinners. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Over the next 2 weeks, I systematically dismantled the life Elise had tried to build with my money and Cory's promises. I contacted every client she'd ever worked with, providing evidence of her fraudulent billing practices. I reached out to her professional network, sharing screenshots of the texts where she'd mocked their work and gossiped about their personal lives. The design community in Boston is smaller than people think, and word travels fast. Within days, Elise was persona non grata. Job interviews were canceled, contracts were terminated, and former friends stopped returning her calls. Cory faced his own reckoning. Alicia had connections throughout Boston's business community, and she used every one of them. His private equity firm quietly asked him to resign. His country club membership was revoked. His favorite restaurants suddenly had no available tables. I, meanwhile, was thriving. With Miriam gone, I hired a new assistant, a competent, professional woman who kept her personal life separate from her work. My business was booming, partly because several of Elise's former clients had switched to my firm after learning about her fraudulent practices. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. Terry had advised me well. I'd documented everything, kept meticulous records, and built an airtight case. Elise's lawyer, a public defender who'd drawn the short straw, could only advise her to accept whatever settlement I offered, which was nothing. She committed fraud using marital assets, Terry explained to her lawyer. She violated her fiduciary duty to the marriage. In Massachusetts, that means she forfeits any claim to alimony or property division. Elise tried to fight it, of course. She hired a better lawyer with money she didn't have, borrowed from family members who were increasingly tired of her drama. But the evidence was overwhelming, and her lawyer eventually advised her to cut her losses. The final divorce hearing was scheduled for a Friday morning in October. I arrived early, wearing my best suit and carrying a briefcase full of documentation I probably wouldn't need. Terry had assured me it would be a formality. Elise arrived looking haggard and desperate. She'd lost weight, and not in a good way. Her hair was limp, her clothes were wrinkled, and she had the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't slept well in months. Cory was there too, apparently for moral support, though he looked almost as bad as she did. Alicia had cleaned him out thoroughly, and he was facing his own legal troubles related to some questionable business deals his ex-wife had uncovered during the divorce discovery process. The hearing lasted 20 minutes. The judge reviewed the evidence, listened to both sides, and rendered his verdict with the enthusiasm of a man reading a grocery list. Divorce granted, no alimony, no property division, court costs to be paid by the respondent. Elise broke down, crying. Cory put his arm around her, which was touching in a pathetic sort of way. Two cheaters, comforting each other in their mutual destruction. I walked out of the courthouse a free man, financially intact and emotionally satisfied. Justice had been served, and it tasted better than I'd expected. But the story doesn't end there. 6 months later, I was having dinner at one of Boston's finest restaurants, the kind of place Elise used to dream about but could never afford on her own. I was celebrating the closing of a major deal, dining alone and enjoying the solitude. That's when I saw them. Elise and Cory at a corner table sharing what looked like the cheapest bottle of wine on the menu. They were both working as servers at different restaurants, trying to rebuild their lives from the ground up. The irony was delicious. They were finally having their romantic dinners, but now they were splitting appetizers because that's all they could afford. Elise looked up and saw me. Our eyes met across the restaurant, and I raised my glass of excellent wine in a mock toast. She looked away quickly, her face burning with shame. I finished my meal, paid the check with a credit card that had no spending limit, and walked over to their table. "Elise?" I said pleasantly. "Cory, how nice to see you both." They looked up at me like deer in headlights. "I just wanted to thank you," I continued, "for showing me who you really were. It saved me years of wondering what was wrong with our marriage. Turns out, nothing was wrong with the marriage. Something was wrong with you." I dropped a $20 bill on their table. "That should cover your wine," I said, "and maybe dessert if you split it." I walked away, leaving them to contemplate the ruins of their grand romance, built on lies and sustained by betrayal. Outside, the Boston evening was crisp and full of possibilities. I had a successful business, a beautiful home that was finally mine alone, and the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys win. I pulled out my phone and called Terry. "Want to grab a real drink?" I asked. "Always," he replied. "We celebrating something?" "Yeah," I said, walking toward my car. "We're celebrating the fact that revenge, when properly executed, is the sweetest dish of all." And it was.